Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Darla Thurber, and I'm Vice President for External Affairs here at National Park College. I will be moderating today, and I'm so glad that you're here. I'm thrilled to see friends who've registered from the Hot Springs, Lake Hamilton, and Malvern school districts, the City of Hot Springs, community partners, and of course, NPC students and staff. You guys are in for a treat for the next hour as we have an enriching conversation with our special guest, and then we watch a moving performance by the Hot Springs High Dance Troupe. This event is part of National Park College's Black History Month celebration. Black History Month is observed in the United States annually each February. The purpose is to give focus to and celebrate the accomplishments by African Americans and to recognize their central role in U.S. history. The significance with the date of February is that February 1st, 1865 was the date the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which abolished slavery, was adopted by the 38th Congress. Today, Black History Month continues the discussion and encourages the study of achievements by African Americans year-round. We'll have two housekeeping items before we begin. We want this to be an interactive event, so you're welcome to submit questions to the Q&A. There's a Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and you're welcome to submit those questions throughout, and we'll try to answer all of those. And immediately following the dance performance, we ask that you participate in a survey to help us improve on events such as this. The survey is short, and it will appear when the dance video ends. So I think that's it. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mr. and Reverend Roger Powell to give the official welcome and introduce our special guest. Roger is an accomplished bachelor-level social worker who leads a team of 25 caseworkers across the state of Arkansas. His personal ambition is to lift individuals and families out of poverty. Roger is currently in the master's program in the School of Social Work at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. He has launched the Cross of Garland County. The Cross of Garland County is an organization that will lead in efforts to build thriving communities by empowering individuals and families across the state. Roger is also the pastor of the Cross Church of God in Christ and is extremely motivated, determined, and ready to be the change agent we need for our communities. And he just happens to be an NPC alum as well. Please welcome my friend, Roger Powell.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you again to National Park College Black History Month celebration. I have the privilege to introduce Spirit Tawfiq. She is an anti-racism educator and founder of Roots of the Spirit, an organization created to uproot racism through storytelling, education, and the arts. She is the creator and host of Roots of the Spirit podcast, a space to galvanize change through honest conversations and identity, racism, race, and intersecting social justice issues. As a professional speaker and playwright, Spirit speaks and hosts workshops in K through 12 classrooms, colleges, universities, and organizations about her legacy as the daughter of Minnijean Brown Trickey, one of the Little Rock Nine who desegregated Little Rock Central High School in 1957, inspiring people from all walks of life to discover their own roots and our interconnected history. Born in Canada and now living in New York City, Spirit is an alumna of the University of Arkansas and the Clinton School of Public Service. Her professional experience includes social justice education and advocacy, community relations, and public speaking within the National Park Service, Smithsonian Institution, and as a speaker agent for civil rights icons Minnijean Brown Trickey and formerly for Ruby Bridges. Without further ado, I give to you, I would like to say, our very own Spirit Tawfiq.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Powell, for that gracious introduction. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much, Darla Thurber, for inviting me and welcoming me to your college community. Thank you to the entire National Park community and everyone who has banded together to make today possible. it really feels like home hearing, I feel like, especially with Darla's background, it feels like I am in Arkansas, even though I'm not there physically, but I can feel the connection to a place that had become home to me and where my family is from, where I came to discover my roots. But Arkansas was not always my home. And to be honest, never in a million years did I even imagine that I would ever live in Arkansas. It's a very, very long story, but I'm going to share part of it with you today in a distilled and condensed version. I always looked at my tumultuous journey as a twist of fate, but I've come to learn at this juncture in my life that it's more of a calling, that the universe was guiding me on a path to allow me to unearth and guide my soul back to my roots. In the spirit of Sankofa, of which its meaning is described so beautifully by Harry Belafonte on his organization's website, Sankofa is a metaphorical symbol used by the Akan people of Ghana, generally depicted as a bird with its head turned backward, taking an egg from its back. It expresses the importance of reaching back to knowledge gained in the past and bringing it into the present in order to make positive progress. I woke up on the morning of July 13th, 2013 with knots in my stomach, with a deep pain and sadness and agitation after learning the news that George Zimmerman, the man who had murdered Trayvon Martin, had been acquitted, deemed not guilty by a jury comprised of 6 women. I couldn't believe my eyes, I couldn't believe my ears, that this beautiful young Black youth at the tender age of 17 was merely walking home from a convenience store with an iced tea and a pack of candy in his pocket. He was stolen by the hands of violence and systemic racism. I was embroiled with emotion and took to Facebook to express my sorrow. I started out with, I feel like a sellout if I don't speak. I feel like my legacy is in vain. I feel useless and I feel like a silent witness. I went on for many paragraphs that the Arkansas Times, who published a snippet of my post, described as me speaking out fiercely and as a primal scream about racial injustice. I ended it with, I cannot let my family's life be in vain, their struggle, Trayvon Martin's death in vain. As Dr. King said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. This is a national emergency and I will not be silent. So Trayvon Martin's murder and acquittal thereafter came to me at an interesting time in my life. I was living in Seattle, Washington at the time. I had moved there from Little Rock to take a promotion with my career with the National Park Service. Or at least that's part of the reason why I thought I was going to Seattle. I had moved from Little Rock where I had been living 10 years. But in order to understand how I ended up in Little Rock in the first place, I have to take you even further back. I was actually born and raised in Northern Ontario, Canada. I was born on a farm. We had a spectacular forest that was not only our classroom, our playground, but it was actually our oasis. We raised our own cows, chickens, goats. We made our own butter. We milked our own cows. We even churned our own ice cream. I was a very cheerful child, super vivacious, full of life, curious, and as they say, full of spirit. This was my life and this was the world that I knew. I knew nothing different, but it wasn't until I and my siblings went to school that things began to change. See, my mother is Black and my father is white, but growing up, I didn't look at it as anything except our normal, regular life. I didn't have a tainted lens from which to view my family at that young age especially, but that all changed, as I mentioned, as I entered elementary school and began a course firsthand in the introduction to the disease of racism. So many days I would be frozen on the playground or petrified or embarrassed, sliding down the chair in my seat in my classroom by the sting of racism, which came in the form of name calling, bullying, isolation, and violence in many instances for my siblings. I can only speak personally for what it felt like, but in essence, the way I describe it is like a dimming of my light, a sadness, an assault on my soul, and a crushing of my spirit. We never told our parents because it was painful and there was a lot of shame surrounding it. And we suppressed the pain. However, that pain lived within us dormant. So growing up, experiencing racism, yet I had no idea of my family's history. I didn't know that I came from a long line of freedom fighters and activists who literally put their lives on the line in the name of social justice. But although I didn't know their story, we definitely had some clues. I remember walking down the street in Toronto, Canada in the first grade, chanting, "Free Mandela, jail Bota." Had no idea what I was saying, but I was marching nonetheless. In the 5th grade, my little sister Layla and I were arrested along with my mother, protesting the logging of an old growth forest in Temagami, Canada. I did a scrapbook presentation and handed it in to my teacher. Let's just say she was not impressed or enthused. In the 7th grade, I sat in a dimly lit courtroom as my brother Isaiah recounted and relived through testimony the brutal attack he received from being the victim of police brutality. That was actually a turning point in my life because it was at that moment that my mother decided that she needed to come forward and tell her story to help support her son who is experiencing the racism that she thought that she helped put an end to almost 40 years prior. And again, all the while, I had no idea the depth of my family story. Around that time, in a very short time frame, and pretty much by accident, I learned that my parents were both from the United States, met in college, got married despite miscegenation laws that made it illegal for Black and white people to marry, moved to Canada in protest of the Vietnam War, acquired land, became hippies, and raised a family, leaving their past behind, or so they thought. Life took its course and my family split up. My parents split up at a certain point, and we left the farm and moved to Ottawa, Canada, which is Canada's capital. We moved to Ottawa, which is Canada's capital city. My mother had just started opening up about her story, about her experience as being one of the first 9 Black students to desegregate Central High School in 1957, more commonly known as being one of the Little Rock Nine. She played it off as super insignificant and didn't divulge too much information. But it was the arrival of a book published by Scholastic called Warriors Don't Cry that my whole entire life changed. The book came in the mail, written by Melba Patillo Beals, one of the Little Rock Nine, and I was just blown away that here there was this book I could hold in my hand and read about an experience that my mother endured when she was around the same age as me. And then what happened is there was just this evolution. It was really cool because the next year, the Ernest Green story came out, which if you haven't heard of it, it's a Disney movie depicting through Ernest Green's eyes, the first Black student to graduate from Central High School in 1958. And there was a Hollywood star playing my mother. So I was like, wow, I mean, there was a book and now there's a movie and there's a Hollywood actor playing my mother. I was just blown away and so eager and hungry to learn even more about this story. And then the next year, as I was 16 years old, I remember my friends and I gathered around the television because my mother and the Little Rock Nine were invited to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show. And how cool was I the next day when we got to go back to school and my mother was on the Oprah Show, hello. So that was an amazing moment. But really what it did for me is allowed me to get an inkling of the depth and magnitude of my mother's story and legacy. In 1997, I was 17 years old, and President Bill Clinton, as sitting president, welcomed the Little Rock Nine and their families from across the country. We were living in Canada. Gloria Ray and her family were living in Sweden, and invited our families to honor the Little Rock Nine and literally and symbolically hold the doors open and welcome them back on the 40th anniversary. So there was an amazing commemorative events for the entire week. And for my young Canadian mind, I was just in awe. One of the things that stood out to me is that there were a lot of interviews, and my mother was being interviewed by a journalist, and they brought me into the picture because I was 17 and my mother was 16 when it happened. And they asked, so how do you feel about this? What is going through your mind? And I don't remember it personally, but my friend Dana reminded me just a couple years ago. She said, I'll never forget it, ever. She said, your response was, here I am failing math. And when my mother was my age, she was changing the world. So even though I was young, I was starting to understand the weight, the magnitude, and also the responsibility that comes along with this journey. Needless to say, I fell in love with the story of the Little Rock Nine. It blew my mind. And even though I was saddened by, as a young person, the racism that I experienced, I thought to myself, my goodness, my mother had to have a military escort to take her to and from class to keep her safe. And even with the military present, the 101st Airborne, she was still the victim of extreme violence, hatred, and racism. So another twist and turn is in '99, my family moved back to the United States. And in 2002, we moved to Little Rock. Remember I said never in a million years did I think I would be in Little Rock? Well, here I was. My little sister and I were on our way to LA to become movie stars, of course. And we stopped in Little Rock, and 10 years later, I decided to take another move. But in other words, I landed right where I needed to be. And it was so ironic because I had worked for Parks Canada a couple years before I moved to the United States. So I had firsthand experience working with a national park system. And there was an opening at the Central High National Historic Site, and I applied because I was a college student and I needed a part-time job. Well, that part-time job turned into one of the most sacred, painful, yet healing decade of my life. So I worked as a frontline interpretive park ranger at Central High National Historic Site, interpreting the story of the Little Rock Nine and the desegregation crisis. And I would come home to my family and tell my story. We sat around my grandmother's dining room table with the women from my family, my granny, my mother, my Aunt Phyllis, my little sister Layla, my cousin Pharaoh. For a solid decade, we sat around this table and excavated a very deep wound that had laid dormant in my family for years. We cried together, we laughed together, and we healed together. In 2012, I had been with the National Park Service for 10 years, and I wanted to try something new again, so I thought was part of the reason why I was moving. Also, the stories of the past were weighing heavy on me, knocking me to my knees. I met people from around the world who remembered the Little Rock Nine's plight, who went to school at Central High School during the crisis and recounted very terrible, traumatizing events that my mother was involved with. So I carried all of those stories on me and within me. Of course, it was a joy and privilege to tell the stories of the Little Rock Nine, but again, it was always very heavy. And at that time, I felt like it would be an option for me to walk away from this work, or at least temporarily. So in 2012, I was very happy to receive a promotion to take a job in Seattle with the National Park Service. And I was excited about my new adventure. I literally took a break from doing any workshops, any talks, anything to do with the Little Rock Nine. I just kind of walked away from it cold turkey. It was the same year that I arrived in Seattle that Trayvon Martin was killed. As I mentioned earlier, I just couldn't sit with this injustice, and the activist in me was ferociously stirred up. And after a 1-year hiatus from Facebook, I let my thoughts loose with the post that I described earlier. I realized in this moment that I had to go back to reclaim my story, my family legacy, and my roots. This knowing that this is my life's purpose and a deep responsibility came to be a bridge. I felt as though I was a bridge between our interconnected, painful past to the present, because we're still dealing with racism and social injustice today. Another fork in the road is that my fiance, now husband, Hisham, lived in New York. And so I decided to move to New York to be with him, and that's where I'm still living. So that was around 2014. I was still busy with the move and kind of settling into New York when Eric Garner was killed by the police in broad daylight, strangled on video, saying, "I can't breathe." Then Michael Brown, an 18-year-old young Black man, was killed by a police officer. Again, my spirit just ignited to fire, and I took to the streets like so many others and was ready to be arrested and jailed to speak out against injustice. I felt like that was the best way and the loudest possible way that I could contribute to the Black Lives Matter movement. I literally couldn't sit still. And at this point, I had left the National Park Service and wanted to figure out a way to channel my knowledge and skills and the education I had acquired in mass communications, media and television, theater and journalism. And I slowly realized that if I really put my mind to it, that I could make this happen. And that is where Roots of the Spirit, my organization, was born. In 2015, it first launched as a video series. I wanted to honor people who were using their various platforms, whether it be arts or education, to amplify social justice and injustice issues. And in 2018, I formalized my platform, Roots of the Spirit, to a mission of uprooting racism through storytelling, education, and the arts. I just had so much rage, balled up with passion and lessons that I had learned along the way that I wanted to share with the world. I carried with me that 7-year-old girl who felt ostracized, like she didn't belong anywhere, someone who was just an aberration. And I also carried the empowerment that I gained from learning my mother's story, from sitting at my grandmother's table and listening to my granny, my Aunt Phyllis, my mother tell their stories. I learned about racism firsthand, but also delved into the great scholarship on the topic, uncovering, as Isabel Wilkerson names it, the caste system that flourishes throughout the United States. Although I have experienced firsthand racism, I also recognize the privileges that come with my skin color, with my physical appearance, and many other aspects that brought together and culminated in my desire to serve as an intergenerational bridge to galvanize change by having honest conversations about identity, race, racism, and social justice. And at a certain point, I was questioning what I was doing. When people would ask, "So what do you do?" I'd say, "I'm an anti-racism educator," and sometimes that just turned into blank stares. And then the summer of 2020 happened. In the midst of a global pandemic, Ahmaud Arbery, which yesterday actually marked the 1-year anniversary of his murder, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered. The haunting of systemic racism was bubbling to the surface and out front for the world to see. The Black Lives Matter movement, which had been going strong for years, they were always doing the hard work, but they once again rose to as an international powerful force to try to put an end to social injustices. So you might be wondering, okay, what does this have to do with me? And I'm here to let you know that, as I mentioned before, I use my story to serve as an intergenerational bridge, but I also use it to try to spark thought and to spark dialogue, but also to spark something within you to think about how our stories can be used as tools for social justice. So there are 3 main things that I would like for you to consider and walk away with. 1 is that activism comes in many shapes and forms, and we can turn pain into positive progress. I didn't have to be in the streets getting arrested, marching, although I love marching. I learned that lesson, that I could express myself and be effective and powerful in my own way, using my own gifts. And I want you to walk away with that. It takes all of us in many ways to build strong forces against this disease of racism. We need to tend to this sickness in so many different ways. We need medicine, we need researchers, we need educators, artists, writers, photographers to bring the sunlight and joy. Joy truly is a form of powerful resistance. We need friendship and support systems. We need love. And as Dr. Ibram X. Kendi described, racism is like cancer. We need to not get upset when diagnosed with the disease, but see it as a starting point to then seek treatment. Avoidance and denial is not the answer. We must hold one another accountable. Number 2, silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. And that's a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Isabel Wilkerson's epic book, Caste. And 3, to know your history individually and collectively is to know yourself. It is the necessary responsibility of each one of us to learn our shared history so that we may be useful to a collective future analysis of history and power. So I'm so glad to have been able to bring you into my journey and to walk down the path that I have of being the daughter of one of the Little Rock Nine, to carry that legacy forward, the experiences I had as a young person. And I couldn't sum it up better than in the words of the great world-renowned poet Rumi. I said, "What about my eyes?" He said, "Keep them on the road." I said, "What about my passion?" He said, "Keep it burning." I said, "What about my heart?" He said, "Tell me what you hold inside it." I said, "Pain and sorrow?" He said, "Stay with it. The wound is the place where the light enters you." Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I will remind folks, we now have the Q&A turned on. So if you have a question that you would like to raise to Spirit, please use that. I'll relay those to Spirit to answer. When you mentioned the dimming of your light, I don't know, I just felt very emotional when you said that, because what you said later about joy, that's what I feel from you, Spirit, and the fact that you use your rage and your passion in this way is so beneficial to us, and to hear your story. And it's just, I mean, you were with us, you and your mother, Minnijean Brown Trickey, were here on campus in September of 2018. It seems like just a couple of months ago, and it's already been that long ago. And prior to that, I didn't know that you didn't know that history line in your family until later. And it's just amazing to hear that again, for you to be realizing that at that point in your life. And then to be reading about it in a book or seeing it in a movie, that is so surreal, I can only imagine.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, my mother and I had an amazing time when we came last time to National Park College. It was fantastic.
We do have a question about your organization specifically, Spirit. If how could we be involved with Roots of the Spirit? Or if that's not possible, how can we be involved in a similar way, matching our own passions locally?
Wonderful, wonderful question. Well, Roots of the Spirit, I have a website, and it's rootsofthespirit.com. And on my website, I outline the work that I do that Reverend Powell mentioned, just in terms of, I have a speakers bureau. I represent my mother as a speaker. I also do speaking engagements. I have a podcast called the Roots of the Spirit podcast. So you are cordially invited to become a loyal listener to the podcast and recommend any different topics that you'd like to hear about. Maybe you'd like to be a guest yourself. It's all in the spirit of uprooting racism through storytelling, education, and the arts, and having honest, casual conversations about racism. And then also I do workshops. I do K through 12 workshops, and I also do anti-racism training. We have a Facebook group, which you can join, the Roots of the Spirit community, where there are other passionate core root respondents, as I call them, who are sharing with one another different resources and stories and amplifying each other's voices so that we can feel a part of a community that is proactively seeking change. Yeah, and I mean, sky is the limit. Honestly, I grew it completely organically in my entire talk. I hope you picked out from it that it was an accident. But it really was like when I named Roots of the Spirit, I had no idea that it was almost like my journey to realizing that title itself. It has come to life over the past few years. So in other words, I say that to say very organic, humble beginnings, and it's growing all the time. So if you have any ideas on networking or ways in which we can continue to grow this community, I am very open to that. Thank you very much for that awesome question.
We have a comment here. Well, I'm just going to let you know who it's from. Someone named Phyllis Brown. I don't know if you can see those spirits, so I'll read it for you. It says, "Spirit, there is more history to add to your life history."
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Let me pull in a bit.
Sure. "Spirit, there is more history to add to your life history."
Oh, so my Aunt Phyllis, the beloved Aunt Phyllis, and I hope many of you watching have had the pleasure and honor of meeting my aunt. Yeah, it's amazing just thinking back to all of the conversations that were sparked at that living room table, and also learning about like my Aunt Phyllis and her road to activism and how much of a strong activist she was and is. My Uncle Bobby, who founded the Black United Youth in Little Rock, and my Uncle Dwight, who was one of the very first, I know I need to get this right, but I know that he was one of the first Black sound engineers, I think I don't want to say the wrong channel, but one of the very prominent news stations in Little Rock, and went on to work in the Reagan administration. So I stand so humbly and gratefully and proudly on my Aunt Phyllis, my mother, my aunts, my uncles, on their shoulders. So hi, Aunt Phyllis. Hi, Aunt P, as many of you know her.
That is excellent. I think what we're going to do right now, guys, is we are going to move to Miss Camilla Holden from the Hot Springs Dance Troupe. Camilla is going to kind of intro this phenomenal video that you all are about to watch. But I'm going to keep monitoring the question and answer chat over here, and we will have time to answer a couple more questions after we watch the video performance. And so, Miss Camilla, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you would kick us off for this beautiful performance you guys put together.
All right. It's nice to see everyone. I just want to take a second and say how moved I was by Spirit's story and her message. And I hope that our dance inspires you all as nearly as much as her story does. So I am a 5-year member of the Hot Springs Dance Troupe and the dance program at Hot Springs High School. And I am now a senior, so this is my last year, and I have been as involved as you possibly can be within the dance troupe. And today I'm just going to share a little bit about our vision, a little bit about the dance troupe itself, and then a little bit about our dance before we show it to y'all. So the vision of the Hot Springs Dance Troupe is to provide a foundation in dance technique, connect students to guest artists and teachers, and experiences with professional performers, and connect to the community around us. We also strive to empower all students to find trust and confide in each other, to create and appreciate differences, similarities, and the art of movement. Our mission is to create a safe environment where students can build self-confidence, develop technique in classical and contemporary styles, build a foundation for leadership skills and community involvement, define their voice, and cultivate relationships within the studio, school, and community to inspire creativity, acceptance, and appreciation of the arts. The Hot Springs Dance Troupe itself is a company of 10 through 12th grade dancers from Hot Springs World Class High School, representing the Hot Springs School District in Arkansas. This troupe was founded by Amy Bramlett Turner, who I'm filling in for today. The Hot Springs Dance Troupe's young dancers study ballet, jazz, modern, and tap with Mrs. Bramlett Turner during and after school, and we have performed frequently in the Hot Springs community with organizations such as the NAACP MLK Prayer Breakfast, the Muses Creative Artistry Project, the Uzuri Project, and the Arkansas MLK Commission, along with several other local benefits, fundraisers, and gala events. While the troupe continuously trains year-round in technique classes, we also work diligently to raise funds to perform on tour with Young Tanzimer, Stars of Tomorrow, where we have performed throughout Austria, Germany, and Italy. Throughout this school dance program, students grow to request, accept, and celebrate their unique individuality and differences. Mrs. Bramlett Turner is inspired and driven to help her students define their voices as artists, dancers, and people, specifically through technique, discipline, and the collaborative creation and choreography inspired by social justice concerns in our world. I am a firsthand testimony to the incredible impact that the Hot Springs Dance Troupe and the Hot Springs Dance Program and Miss Bramlett Turner herself have had, because I have not only found my voice as a young adult and a young leader within my school and community, but I have found my voice as a first generation Hispanic American student, and embracing my culture to share my story with others as well. The past year has been chaotic with the COVID-19 pandemic and the growing concerns of racial injustices in our country. These student dancers, us, that are depicted in the video, we reflected on our experiences and the climate of our world to dig into possible questions, solutions, and roots. Father, what do you mean I don't look like I speak two languages? Am I living with life with integrity to my heritage, yet openness to unlimited possibility? Choreographed by Hot Springs Dance Troupe director Amy Bramlett Turner and inspired by student reflections, Broken Reflection is inspired by the frustrations of preconceptions that do not necessarily represent individuals accurately. This is Broken Reflection by the Hot Springs Dance Troupe.
Amazing. Amazing.
Camilla, that was beautiful. Every one of your performances is so moving, and the messages that you all create. You young ladies do a phenomenal job, and thank you for sharing that with us today. We'll expect as soon as
Thank you so much. I'm so glad I was able to. I hope everyone enjoyed it.
We did. Absolutely. I have a couple of very sweet notes I need to share with Spirit, and then another question. Well, actually, one is for Phyllis. So this is for who we call Aunt Phyllis from John Anderson. John, I hope you don't mind that I'm reading this out loud here. It's good to hear from you again. I don't know if you remember me, but we met when I was attending the University of Central Arkansas. I still have the picture from that day.
That's awesome.
And then Phyllis, to you, Spirit, she says, Mamie Phipps Clark was born in Hot Springs. That's the additional history to add to your history.
Wonderful. Yes, there's a beautiful story to go along with that. I guess we'll kind of have to save it for another day, but it is the subject of one of my podcasts, which maybe I can put in the chat.
Oh, excellent.
So thank you, Aunt P.
And then we have a note from, I believe, I think it's your name. It's Deirdre Gladwin. And Deirdre, please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. Thank you, Spirit, for sharing your journey. And while I knew some of your family and personal history, you brought it full circle. I'm excited to know you have made your work and are living your life dedicated to educating and continuing the conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes.
And then we have another question. What can you share with young Black people and other people of color when they suffer from the different forms of racism?
Ooh, we could spend some time talking about it. One of the things that I have come to know and through my journey is that there's a lot of internalized racism that we walk around with on a daily basis. And I'm a big proponent of seeking different forms of healing, seeking a community first and foremost, which is one of the reasons why I launched my Roots of the Spirit platform, because racism can make you feel like racism is gaslighting. It makes you feel like you're like, did that really happen? Like microaggressions that take place on a regular basis. We call them microaggressions, but as they've been described, they're like a paper cut. And if you have like 1,000 paper cuts on you, then it is extremely difficult to function, to be able to be clear-minded, to be at peace. So I'm a big proponent of seeking community and also seeking different methods of healing, whether that be through art, self-expression, whether that be therapy. I think there's a real big movement right now to seek out different types of therapy, whether that be yoga, meditation, or therapy as in like the traditional therapy. So again, I say try to seek out a community, and also try to assess within yourself, like what would be a first step toward embarking on a healing journey. And if I didn't adequately answer that question, I'm super happy to communicate with you directly. If you go on my website, there's a contact form, send me an email. I'll spend all the time we need to discuss it further, because that is why I'm here. That's why I tell my story, is so that we can feel a part of a community and we can feel safe and we can seek healing.
One other comment. You mentioned your husband is an actor. I'm thinking I may be familiar with your husband. Can you allude to that more?
Sure. It's tied to Arkansas, so I'll tell like a super mini story. I met my husband, Tawfiq, in 2011. He is an actor and he's from New York, and he was in A Raisin in the Sun at the Arkansas Repertory Theater. I was actually working on the play, and I was the assistant director. So he was an actor from New York, I was assistant director, purely professional relationship. And a few years later, he gave me a call while I was in Seattle. He said, "Hey, what are you up to?" Anyways, one thing led to another. We were married in 2016. And prior to that, in 2013, he booked a role on the show, the NBC show, The Blacklist. So I'm really proud of him. He is going on, they're in the 8th season at this moment, going on season 9 of his character is called Dembe on The Blacklist. And I'm also really proud because he also comes from an amazing line of activists and warriors and is a retired firefighter from the FDNY. So thank you for asking about Hisham.
Thank you so much for sharing that. All right, we have time for one more question. I'm going to give you a few seconds to type it in. When the newspaper interviewed about having you here, Spirit, we just talked about the tremendous response that we received after you and your mother visited us in person. And as you recall, we were over in our largest facility and still didn't have enough room. The day before, there was a brigade of people just bringing in more chairs and more chairs and more chairs. And we were trying to get, because we had invited the area public schools to come, and we had, I can't tell you how many public schools responded and said, "Are you sure there's only a max of," and I think we had capped it at maybe 30 per school, just so we could get folks, you know, all the schools involved. And of course, we did have it live streamed as well. But people wanted to be here. People wanted to be with you and your mom. And so whenever the newspaper said, "Well, you know, what was part of your decision to bring Spirit to campus virtually?" we said there was no decision. I mean, that's just a given. And so this will just be one of many times that we will stay connected to you. Oh, we do have a question.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you wrote a play titled One Night. Do you have time to talk about that? And of course,
absolutely. So, you know, I literally, like, I was talking to my sister recently, who I just wanted to bounce some of my ideas and my remarks and kind of the flow of my message. And I said, I feel strange, like kind of telling so much about me. Does it resonate that I'm trying to use my experience as a catalyst for conversation? Like, it's not indulging on me. It's more so, let me use my story to inspire you in learning your story. So in that being said, there are many elements to my life that, of course, I didn't bring forth, but one of them is a very special project that I worked on, which is the writing and producing of my play 1/9, which is a play I wrote for, actually it was a playwriting class when I went to, I can say ULR with this group, the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. My grade wasn't all that good. But anyways, I submitted my play, and then this was like 2002, and it just lay dormant. It just sat like as an assignment. I wrote about my mother's experience desegregating Central, but through her eyes and through the family's eyes, because prior to that, it was scholars, it was historians, and it was documentaries. And I was like, other than Melba's book, there are not a whole lot of firsthand accounts. So I wrote that play. It lay dormant. It was an assignment. My professor, Brad Moy, who worked at UALR, then worked at the Arkansas Rep, and he informed me of a playwriting contest. I entered the contest. Just like a lot of things in my life, I never thought that I would win the playwriting contest, but me and another amazing playwright from Arkansas won the contest. They gave us a $500 stipend, and they did a public reading for the community. So during the public reading, the director and artistic director of the Rep had a conversation and said, we need to make this a touring educational, an educational touring play. And I was so fortunate that the Arkansas Repertory Theater picked up my play, provided me with a dramaturg, really embraced my creative process, and hired actors, built a set, and took the play on the road. So they went to 10 different schools and not only produced the play, also used students from the school to engage them directly as extras in the acting experience. And then every event was culminated with a community conversation. So again, I use that, my journey with that play, to inspire you. If arts is what you're interested in, connect with the Arkansas Repertory Theater, connect with the theaters in Hot Springs, connect with different organizations, become an intern, become an usher, which is what I was doing when all of this started blossoming, and put yourself in the room of where you want to be, who you want to be among, and what you want to do. Because you never know, like all of this stuff. I'm sitting in my place in Harlem, New York. That has always been a dream for me. But in ways, I was creating my own path and making my way toward my dream, regardless of the fact that I knew it. I just put myself in these places and spaces and around these people. So thank you for asking about my play. If you're an educator, I'd love to share it with you. You can use it in your classroom to use theater as a tool for sparking these conversations.
That is a perfect segue to our last question. And then please stay on the line, everyone. I still want you to fill out the very quick survey at the end, and we'll pop up for you after we answer this last question. And this is from Jana at the Dawson Educational Co-op. And I think that's an Arkadelphian. Please forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think that's right. Hi, Jana. Jana has a question, Spirit. Do you have any quick tools for classroom teachers or community members to use to reflect on the racism they might actually harbor that they didn't realize?
Absolutely. There are many resources, and I think the part of how my platform came to be was, I was like, just knowing the people that I know by virtue of my mother's place in history, working at the historic site, being in classrooms. I'm like, I feel like I stand in this position where I'm like, I know where all the resources are. A lot of them anyways. I feel so fortunate, because when I first started working at Central High National Historic Site, we had a bookstore and we had a library, and it was very slender in terms of the resources that you could pick up, the scholarship to read about these stories. But now there are just books in abundance. There are documentaries, movies. Also, I highly encourage you to connect with Little Rock Central High National Historic Site in Little Rock, Arkansas. They have amazing educational programs. And I'm sure if you connected with them, you will find an abundance of lesson plans. They do ranger talks and walks. They have film series. They just have amazing programs. that not only, again, microcosm alert, not microcosm, analogy alert, they not only talk about the past, but they use the past, similarly to how I use my story, to talk about current day racism. They're bridging the past and saying there's a continuum, there's a blueprint. And in order for us to understand what's happening today, what happened in the summer of 2020, which is still going, we have to understand the historical context. And as the great Dr. Terrence Roberts, one of the Little Rock Nine, said, we can't have honest conversations about racism until we have an informed historical perspective. And I think that's the key in whatever capacity you deem fit for your classroom, is to help build that historical perspective so that we're working from a foundation of truth, so that from there we can understand, grow, and then potentially reconciliation and healing is possible.
Excellent. Well, this happened so fast. This hour went by so incredibly fast. As I said, this is not the end. This is just another hello along our journey. And we thank you so much, Spirit, for giving us an hour of your time. And we would love to follow up and check out rootsofthespirit.org and find you on Facebook and just continue to be a part of this conversation. And so I would like to ask everyone, you will see the survey come up in just a sec, if you wouldn't mind to fill that out. I think 5 or 6 questions, that just helps us to be better about what we do. And so also be looking for more events from us. We will continue a few virtual events until we get all of this stuff behind us and we can be in rooms again, we can hug, we can laugh together and do it in a safe space, a safe and healthy space. So Camilla, thank you again for representing the Hot Springs Dance Troupe. What a beautiful performance. Look forward to seeing you again soon. And Roger, Reverend, friend, Mr. Dad, all the things, Roger Powell, NPC alum, thank you for being with us today and sharing.
My pleasure.
Welcome to everyone and
my pleasure.
Introducing Spirit. And thank you to the cast who's behind the scenes who made today possible. You think you just turn on a computer screen and it all happens, and it actually does if it weren't for someone that you probably won't even see now, Nathan Ritter, our IT guru here. He makes all of this happen for us. And so if he could have only given me my voice back that just kind of fell away this morning when I woke up, I thought that's the perfect day to lose your voice. So I'm so sorry I sound like this, but again, thank you to Nathan, Melanie, Nicole, Melissa, Carey, all those people that you're not going to see today, but we appreciate you all very, very much. So you should have your survey up now. If you finish that, we'll say goodbye for now, but we'll say hello again soon. Spirit, thank you so much.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
And Ann Phyllis, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Aunt P. Nicole says hi.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Take care. It was a pleasure. Love you all. Thank you.